So you need a brand new blower, but all of those AI cockwombles like lizard in human skin Marky Zuckerberg have gone and bought up all of the components and made smartphones stupidly expensive. Well, no bother. The good news is you can still find some rather splendid mid-range phones in 2026 from the likes of Google, Xiaomi, Vivo, OnePlus, Nothing and Samsung. I'm talking handsets boasting cracking camera tech, ridiculously good battery life, obligatory AI nonsense, and more than enough grunt to play the latest Android games, all for a price that shouldn't skint you. I've reviewed literally dozens of mid-range smartphones this past year, so here's my pick of the very best right now as we stroll our way into summer 2026. Actually, not so much stroll, more like desperately crawl by our fingertips, melting into a fleshy puddle. You'll find full reviews of these phones right here on TechSpert. Please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. Cheers! Now, one of the first mid-range Android phones you should have a proper squint at, especially if you want one of the best cameras for not too much cash, is Google's Pixel 10a. This is another dinky wee delight at just 6.3 inches, although despite sporting slimmer bezels than the previous Pixel 9a, they could still accurately be described as quite chunky. And also, Google did choose to recycle a lot of the old hardware from that Pixel 9a for the fresh new 10a, including the Tensor G4 chipset which runs the show. And so while gaming is certainly possible, you will find considerably more powerful blowers in this lineup. But still, if you're not bothered about that, the display is an absolute cracker, providing a rich, crispy view of your telly shows or whatever, despite that more compact design. The battery life is excellent as well, and the recharging not particularly lethargic. You've got 45 watt wide charging support, so you get 50% recharge in roughly half an hour. You've also got support for original Qi wireless charging. And Google certainly does not disappoint on the support side as well. You've got 7 guaranteed OS updates and years of security patching here, assuming the planet hasn't spontaneously combusted in that time. But as always, one of the true highlights of this Google handset is the excellent camera tech. That hardware isn't as advanced in the Pixel 10a versus the Pixel 10 flagships, but the top-notch image processing smarts means you'll get good-looking pics at pretty much any time of day. And even if your photo ends up looking a bit cack, well, no worries, because Google has stuffed this thing with all kinds of smart-ass AI editing tools to rescue even quite shonky snaps. My full Pixel 10a review is live right now, comparing it with the 9a. But honestly, if you can find that older 9a on a good deal, I would say grab that one instead. It's practically a Pixel 10a, and it still has 6 more years of OS updates and security patching to go. Now, one of my other favourite mid-rangers is the OnePlus Nord 4, a full metal banger that brings back glorious happy memories of those quality phones that HTC and LG used to spaff out. Those really were better days all round, especially as my liver wasn't quite as hurty and I actually had more hair on my head than on my arse. But sadly, this all-metal monster has now been replaced with the not quite as crotch-stirringly fantastic Nord 5, although you may still find the Nord 4 lurking online for a decent deal. Now, the OnePlus Nord 5 may have reverted to a boring, distinctly not metal design, and also grown in size to a bloody big 6.83 inches, woof. But you still got a smooth and highly satisfying OxygenOS experience, packed with decent features and not too much of that AI stuff. Although that iconic alert slider has been ripped out and replaced with the plus key, which isn't quite as customizable as you might hope. And OnePlus is still offering 4 years of OS updates and 6 years of security patching, which, while not the best out there, is still pretty ruzzy respectable. That enormous AMOLED screen is gorgeous and responsive to wet fingers, while the stereo speaker arrangement is a bit of a banger too. The OnePlus Nord 5 can get rather toasty under pressure, unfortunately, especially when you are gaming, despite the fact you've got a dedicated cooling system. So you won't want to play Wuthering Waves for too long unless you really want to warm your hands up. Handy for those winter months here in Blighty, perhaps, but also unfortunately the Nord 5 suffers a battery tech downgrade versus the old Nord 4, though mercifully you'll still get a full day of pretty intense action from a single charge. And while the camera results aren't quite as reliable as Google's, this OnePlus Mobile can still produce attractive looking photos even in quite challenging conditions. Complete with a fresh new 50 meg selfie cam, which is great news for anyone who doesn't have a face that looks like a cat just threw up its breakfast.
And I've also got to big up the OnePlus Nord CE5, which is a bit cheaper but still proper lush. This is a wee bit smaller than the Nord 5 and it loses some features like the plus key, while also adding some great stuff like micro SD memory card support. That AMOLED screen is still a stunner, if not quite as bright, although you do drop down to a crappy mono speaker setup. And while the Nord CE5 isn't quite as powerful as the Nord 5, it also doesn't get hotter than Beelzebub's ballsack when you're gaming. Battery life is brilliant, while the camera tech is fine for everyday shenanigans, even if it does go a bit crazy with the processing at times. And you can have a squint at my full reviews of both of these OnePlus phones, plus a full comparison between them right here on the channel. Now, if you really fancy the OnePlus 15 but you can't quite afford it, well, a slightly less harrowingly priced alternative is the OnePlus 15R. Now, this only just about squeezes into the category of mid-range smartphones costing from £629 at launch. But it's certainly well worth a squint, especially for any gamers out there. And this reboot of the OnePlus 15 flagship has a few features like wireless charging stripped out in order to lower the price. The main victim here is the camera setup, which loses the telephoto lens and makes do with the more basic ultra-wide shooter. And if you are looking for decent optics, I'd say probably look elsewhere. However, the OnePlus 15R is powered by Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 5, which may not quite be elite, but it is still proper hench, breezing through Wuthering Waves on maxed out graphics settings, no bother. Plus you get the same excellent gaming mode and yet another stunning 165Hz display. Now, the battery life is just as fantastic on the OnePlus 15R as it is on that flagship. In fact, you get a slightly bigger cell at 7,400 mAh. It's good enough to keep you going all weekend long. And it's all topped off with an excellent bit of OxygenOS software, complete with a few years of guaranteed updates, and of course that obligatory AI bollocks.
Now, if you're tempted to spunk out a whopping great pile of cash for Samsung's Galaxy S26 or one of its even bigger, even pricier siblings, well, stick that wad right back in your pants and maybe consider the more affordable A57 instead. The Galaxy A57 is a capable mid-range mobile, boasting a design that's almost as smart as that S26 flagship, albeit with slightly cheaper materials. And not to mention an exceptionally glossy arse that is smudge central. But it's also thankfully IP68 dust and water resistant, so you can give it a bit of spit and polish when needed. You'll also enjoy a similar One UI software experience to the flagship phones, though a couple of key features like call screening are sadly missing. But thankfully Samsung is at least still offering 6 full years of software support for the A57, so that shiny wee git shouldn't be obsolete anytime soon. The 6.7-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED screen is a banger, while the stereo speaker setup is reasonably beefy too. And while you'll certainly find more powerful smartphones at this mid-range price point, Galaxy A57 can cope with a bit of Wuthering Waves when needed on the lower graphics settings. The battery life's pretty decent too, although sadly there's bugger all support for wireless charging. And the camera works well as long as you're not hoping to capture beautiful stills of your pets in serious action. So overall pretty decent, if not one of my favourite mid-range phones in this roundup. Otherwise, if you want to spend a wee bit less cash, there's always Samsung's Galaxy A37. And this is another water-resistant blower with a 120Hz AMOLED screen, got stereo speakers, and some pretty respectable optics. And as with that A57, you've still got a full 6 years of software support, although the storage has actually decreased versus the older A36, while the performance certainly isn't as keen as that more expensive model.
And if you are tempted by Samsung's Galaxy S25 FE or Fan Edition, well, I'd say probably don't bother unless you see it on a proper good discount. And there really is much better to be had for a similar sort of price. Now, Nothing is another dependable source of quality mid-range blowers, and their latest duo, the Phone 4a and Phone 4a Pro, are two absolute bangers as always. You've got very different design for this generation, with the usual transparent shenanigans for the regular 4a. That's been swapped out for a full metal jacket for the Pro model. And sadly, the glyph lighting of yesteryear has also been replaced with a simple glyph bar on the Nothing Phone 4a. while that Pro model sports a more budget-friendly reboot of the glyph matrix last seen on the flagship Nothing Phone 3. Now this allows for a more customizable and visual experience on the Nothing Phone 4a Pro, but in both cases that glyph shenanigans can be used as a funky notifications light, countdown timer, all kinds of stuff. Flip these phones over and the other end is just as delightful, serving up a poppy OLED display. While the stereo speaker setup is certainly decent enough for enjoying a spot of Netflix, or the satisfying sound of you beating Gribblies right in their chops with an inappropriately attired anime lass. And speaking of which, this pair of mid-range mobiles can happily handle even more demanding games like Wuthering and Waves, although it's certainly a smoother experience on that Pro. And Nothing OS is as lovely as always, packed with the usual obligatory AI, of course, and if you go for the Pro model, you'll also enjoy a lovely bit of eSIM action. I'm also impressed by Nothing's flexible camera setup. Even that cheaper Nothing Phone 4a boasts a proper telephoto shooter, which is quite the rarity at this price point. I gotta say, as much as I love the Pro model, I would just recommend the regular Nothing Phone 4a for most people should more than satisfy.
And note that Nothing has also just released an even more budget-friendly alternative called the Nothing Phone 4B, where that B could stand for basic design and performance, or bugger all telephoto lens. It's not much cheaper than the 4a and it's a bit meh, so I'd certainly say avoid it. But my full review is live right now if you want to squint to see what it's all about. Now, I've been a fan of Motorola's Edge Fusion phones for quite a wee while now, and the latest Edge 70 Fusion is yet another cracker, if not exactly a massive upgrade over its predecessor. That slim and refreshingly lightweight finish is definitely a highlight, especially as it's full-on IP68 and IP69, dust, water and spurt resistant. Although not everyone will be a fan of the curved display, even though I've had very little bother from it myself. Despite this exceptionally slim build, Motorola has still somehow managed to cram a decent sized 5200 mAh battery in there. Or if you don't mind a chunkier finish, you can even pick it up in a 7000 mAh flavour for a proper bit of all weekend action. Plus, if you do find you ever need an emergency top up, well, no worries at all, because you've got 68 watt wired charging support, nice and nippy. As usual with Motorola, you've got yourself a bright and punchy AMOLED screen, while that stereo speaker arrangement is perfectly fine for a bit of Netflix or Crunchyroll or whatever. The everyday performance is generally fine, and the Moto Edge 70 Fusion can even just about handle a bit of gaming on the likes of Wuthering and Waves, although it's certainly far happier with properly optimized titles. As for the camera setup, well, that's pretty much what you would expect at this sort of lower mid-range price point. That main Sony Lite 710 shooter is absolutely fine for everyday snaps, including pics of the Sprog and any fluffy pals that you might have, although the only addition here is a basic ultra-wide shooter. And as always, Motorola ain't the best around when it comes to keeping that software updated. So you'll only get a small handful of OS updates and don't expect any timely security patching.
Now, another manufacturer known for offering beefy hardware for not too much cash is Xiaomi. And one of its latest mid-range mobiles, which is certainly worth a gander, is the Redmi Note 15 Pro Plus 5G. A clunky name for sure, and not quite as impressive as some previous generations of this smartphone, but still decent tech. This durable slab features Victus 2 Gorilla Glass and IP68 dust and water resistance, which is great news if you're a bit of a butterfingers. Of course, not everyone will enjoy Xiaomi's HyperOS experience, which does come laden with crapware and is occasionally a wee bit shonky. And while Xiaomi is guaranteeing 6 years of security patching and 4 OS updates, sounds pretty generous for a mid-ranger, unfortunately one of those 4 OS updates is just used to bring this phone back up to modern standards with HyperOS 3 and Android 16. The huge 6500 mAh battery is quite a bit bigger compared with the previous generation, and it means that you shouldn't be running out of juice over a weekend unless you push things a bit. You've also got a bit of 100 watt wired charging support. It's one of the nippiest in this roundup. Apart from that, it is just slight upgrades for the specs across the board compared with the previous Note 14 Pro Plus. From the slightly bigger AMOLED screen to the slightly more capable Snapdragon 7S Gen 4. And you once again have a 200 meg main shooter that is decent enough for everyday snapping, but it can fart out the occasional soft looking pic. For a few pun less, you can always grab the Redmi Note 15 Pro 5G, and this may lose those plus plaudits, but it's still a bit of a mid-range corker. It's just as water resistant as the Pro Plus with that lovely Victus 2 protection, complete with the same excellent display and stereo speaker setup. You got basically the same 200 meg camera hardware slapped on the arse end as well, so photo and video results very similar. You've actually got an ever so slightly bigger battery stuffed into the regular Pro versus the Pro Plus, 6,580 mAh I believe it is, though it does charge up a wee bit slower thanks to the 45 watt charging support. And pretty much the only other change is the chipset, which has been swapped out for MediaTek's 7400 Ultra. And this isn't quite as dependable when playing on chunky open world behemoths like Wuthering Waves, but still decent enough. And if you fancy livening up your afternoon with some sweat-inducing three-way action, well, I've compared the Redmi Note 15 Pro Plus 5G with the Pro and the vanilla Note 15. So go get that right in your face holes.
And if you find you've got a bit more cash to spunk on your next mid-range smartphone, well, I'd heartily recommend the Xiaomi 17T. This clever wee 6.6-incher has actually shrunk a bit compared with the old 15T, so it is a bit more hand-friendly, although it also still sports a plastic frame despite the higher price tag. MediaTek's Dimensity 8500 Ultra runs the show, so even proper memory-sucking guff like Wuthering Waves play absolutely fine, helped along by Xiaomi's impressive cooling system. And that battery life is another highlight too, because while the size of the phone has actually shrunk a wee bit, the battery capacity has been boosted to 6,500 mAh, complete with a tasty bit of 67 watt wired charging. Although considering the price, the complete lack of wireless charging is a bit of a git. The Xiaomi 17T's Light Fusion camera hasn't really changed up for this generation. It's generally great for stills, but it does struggle with living subjects at times. Although thankfully you do get a proper 50 meg telephoto shooter, which is ideal for getting closer to your subject. And that AMOLED screen is a stunner, boasting full HDR10+ and Dolby Vision support, as well as a wide brightness range, although the speakers aren't quite as beefy as many rivals. So overall, despite a few wee flaws and omissions, the Xiaomi 17T is still a decent mid-ranger, although I'd certainly say wait for a sale.
And then to make things even more complicated, there is Poco, which is kind of a Xiaomi sub-brand, which basically takes those Xiaomi smartphones which only launch in China, then reskins them and relaunches them to a global population. And their best mid-range effort right now is the stunningly good value Poco X8 Pro Max. This massive heifer boasts some slick design, including jazzy disco rings, as well as an eye-searingly bright AMOLED display. Those stereo speakers can be boosted to a physics-defying 400%, while the Dimensity 9500S brains can cope with absolutely anything you hoy at it, helped along by a dependable cooling system. But even more impressive is the almighty 8,500 mAh capacity battery, one of the biggest I've seen stuffed into any smartphone in 2026. That can easily keep you going a full long weekend unless you absolutely lather this thing. And it also means the Poco X8 Pro Max can be happily used as a makeshift power pack when you're on the move. In fact, on that hardware front, it's perhaps the most enticing mid-ranger in this roundup, even though the camera doesn't sport a telephoto shooter. But you do once again have to contend with that divisive HyperOS launcher, same as with the Xiaomi blowers. For a bit less cash, you can always grab yourself the Poco X8 Pro instead. It's not as max, obviously, with a smaller battery, more budget-friendly optics and less grunt in the engine. But hey, it's also a wee bit more compact, it costs less cash, and it comes in this rather lovely Iron Man edition, if you happen to have a rage and throb on for Tony Stark. Now you've also got the Poco F8 Pro, which doesn't quite tickle my fancy, so to speak, like the Poco X8 Pro Max. But the performance is smashing, thanks to the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset. Although I have found that this phone gets a wee bit toasty under pressure. And besides that power boost and the telephoto camera, it's actually pretty similar to the Poco X8 Pro. Next up, the Honor 400 Lite, an absolutely monstrous blower with a poppy AMOLED screen, big old battery and a selfie cam that's ideal for those sexy club snaps. Plus a camera button that's somehow less rubbish than the iPhone 16 Pros, despite the fact that Apple's brick costs 4 times as much. Honor appears to have taken quite a lot of inspiration from Apple, unfortunately, for one, matching that boxy design. Though at least the 400 Lite packs in some AI tools that aren't total toilet. You've also got double the storage of a regular iPhone, while the crisp and punchy 6.7-inch screen features a similar floating turd notch up top. Even the camera results are iPhone-esque with oversaturated pics and boosted colours. As for the performance, well, sadly more demanding games do struggle, but optimised apps like PUBG and Call of Duty fare just fine. So if you fancy an iPhone beat and blower for a fraction of the price, well, check it out.
And Honor also more recently launched the Honor 600 series. And that includes the Honor 600 Lite, which sadly I have not had a chance to review just yet, but stay tuned, hoping to get my mitts all over that pretty soon. But I have reviewed the regular Honor 600. That's a respectable mid-ranger, despite borrowing the dodgy design of a certain American manufacturer known for churning out overpriced, overrated tech. The massive 7000 mAh battery is certainly a highlight, but that price is a bit high for what you get, so I would say definitely wait for a discount.
And also definitely don't sleep on the excellent Honor Magic 8 Lite, which is significantly cheaper than its Pro sibling. It's also a lot less chunky, and it's a tough bugger too. The Honor 8 Lite is apparently constructed from ultra tough tempered glass and features the super fun sounding Ultra Bounce anti-drop technology. Yeah, Ultra Bounce sounds great, so I'm kind of imagining if I was to hoy this phone at the ground right now, it would just magically spring right back up into my grasp. Update. It does not. Okay, so it might not bounce, but it can survive drops up to 2.5 meters in height, and it's also IP68 and 69 dust, water and spurt resistant, with a screen that stays relatively responsive when it is moist. And speaking of that screen, it is large, sharp and poppy. Great stuff for your movies and games and whatnot. And performance is rather limited with a Snapdragon 6 Gen 4 in charge, but the Honor Magic 8 Lite can still cope with fairly demanding games like that Wuthering Waves. Just don't expect a silky smooth frame rate. You're certainly better off with optimized titles like PUBG. And battery life is another absolute highlight of this mid-range magic, courtesy of the 7500 mAh silicon carbon cell. So why the Magic 8 Lite can comfortably survive a full weekend on a single charge, complete with 66 watt fast charging support when that juice is finally drained. Unfortunately, it's not all good news. The camera arrangement hasn't really been upgraded for this generation, so it is merely okay, while macOS can of course be quite bulky at times. Now, if you're after a dedicated gaming smartphone for a mid-range price, well, point your eyeballs at the REDMAGIC 11 Air. This is a surprisingly affordable beefcake boasting some serious specs that still won't absolutely muller your savings. Got plenty of great gaming tools and features packed in there, including responsive shoulder buttons and a seriously stacked gaming toolbar to give you a bit of a leg up in PUBG. While that slightly older Snapdragon chipset can still cope admirably with even the toughest memory guzzling titles out there like Wuthering Waves. And oh yes, the hilariously waifu smartphone assistant Mora is back in action, albeit now with a dodgy AI voice.
Ha ha ha, it tickles. It tickles.
And if you can actually find the bloody thing somewhere online, I would also merrily recommend the Vivo V70, especially for any camera fans, as you've got some upgraded Zeiss branded optics, which pumps out gorgeous natural looking pics. You've even got a telephoto shooter, which is perfect for those portrait snaps. And Vivo hasn't changed many of the other specs compared with the older V60, but that's not really a bad thing, because that 6500 mAh battery should still satisfy the most demanding of users. You got that same Snapdragon 7 Gen 4 chipset, which can handle everyday life and even quite hardcore games like Wuthering Waves. Although I have found this phone does get a wee bit toasty under pressure. But that is one of the few flaws of the Vivo V70, that and the fact that, you know, good bloody luck actually tracking one down here in Blighty. You'll likely have to have a bit of a scrummage online, see if you can get one of the buggers imported.
It's also worth mentioning that OPPO just launched its latest Reno phones, the Reno 16 and Reno 16 Pro. A couple of cracking wee handsets boasting top camera tech and of course that lovely ColorOS experience. However, they are also sadly far from cheap, thanks again to the component shortage shenanigans. And at the time I shot this video, they were still only available to pre-order here in the UK. So I'd say go check out my reviews if you're intrigued, and hopefully they will actually, you know, be on sale at some point with a bit of a discount as well to make them truly tempting.
Oh, and you might, at some point, happen to find yourself tempted by the iPhone 17e, Apple's most affordable handset, although it is still more expensive than pretty much every single Android that I've listed in this mid-range roundup. And your Uncle Spurt has to say massive danglies to that idea. The battery life is decent and the performance is fine, but the creaky old 60Hz screen makes everything feel sludgy, while that basic camera is frankly an embarrassment compared with the Pixels, Vivos, Nothings, etc. of the world. So do yourself a favour and avoid it like the herpes.
And there you have it, my lovelies. That is your Uncle Spurt's slightly sweaty pick of the best mid-range smartphones you can bag yourself right now in summer 2026. As always, I've only included smartphones that I've personally tested and reviewed right here on the TechSpurt, so if I've missed out your own personal pick of the best mid-range smartphone right now, well, certainly be sure to let me know what a useless sack of arse excretions I am down in the comments below. Let us know what your own pick of the best mid-ranger right now is. Please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech, and have yourselves a ruddy, wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everybody, love you!